Hi, I'm Lily, and at my daddy's funeral, my own sister stood up, called me useless, and told the whole church I wasn't his real daughter. Folks gasped, but not one person stood up for me. Not one. They all just watched. But what hurt more is what they'd all known for years. What they'd taken. What they thought I'd never find out. And when that banker leaned over and whispered 5 words, the room turned to ice. You ever been erased by your own blood? The smell of lemon oil and old wood filled the air as I stepped into the church. Not a word was spoken, but grief sat heavy on everyone's shoulders like soaked wool. They sang low, slow, those old hymns that crawl up your spine and make your heart ache, even if you don't know the lyrics. And I knew every word. Daddy loved them spirituals. He'd hum them under his breath while fixing the porch steps, or while sitting silent at the kitchen table long after the dishes were cleared. His silence had a weight to it, like he knew more than he'd ever say. Now, that silence was all I had. The church pews groaned as folks leaned forward, staring at me with eyes full of pity, or suspicion. Couldn't tell which. Maybe both. I smoothed the black silk of my dress, feeling the sweat trickle down my back even though the fans were blowing. People whispered. They always do. But this time, their looks lasted a second too long. Something felt off. Not just grief, no. Something else curled in the corners of that chapel. We sat in the front row. Mama had gone long ago, but Daddy still had a full pew of kids. My half-brothers and sisters lined up like church dolls, all with sad faces and dry eyes. Monette, my oldest sister, sat 2 seats from me. Every time the preacher mentioned my name during the eulogy, she twisted her lips and narrowed her eyes like she bit into something bitter. She'd always been that way, looking at me like I was some stain on the family name. I didn't know why, not really. Just that cold came off her in waves. The pastor invited us to share memories. Monette stood before he even finished the sentence. I'll speak first, she said, voice sharp enough to cut glass. People shifted in their seats. You could feel it. That tension. That thick air right before a storm breaks. I sat still. She walked up like she was walking to the gallows, but she was the executioner. My daddy was a good man, she began. Hard-working. Quiet. Didn't like drama. Folks nodded. He raised us with discipline and love. But he also kept secrets. The room changed. Like someone opened a door and let the cold in. I gotta speak on this, or it'll haunt me. She turned to me. Lily, you ain't even his real daughter. Stop pretending. You were always useless. Gasps flew across the room like birds startled from trees. Some folks sat up straighter. Others looked away. Me? I just sat. My heart didn't break. It tightened. Like it was folding in on itself. My ears rang. My mouth went dry. I didn't cry. Didn't yell. I just froze. Monette handed the mic back like it was nothing. Like she didn't just rip my whole life apart in front of God and everybody. The pastor stood, dumbfounded. Couldn't find his words. The choir looked everywhere but at me. Eyes burned holes through my skin. Still, I stood. Not to speak, just to stand. I looked around. Met their stares. Said nothing. My silence was all I had left. The service ended awkwardly, people slipping out faster than usual. They looked past me. Nobody hugged me. Nobody asked if I was okay. I wasn't in the limo with the others, I walked. Alone. Daddy once told me, Southern funerals can be holy and they can be cruel. He wasn't wrong. I kept thinking about his last words, everything you need, I already gave you. At the time, I thought he meant advice. Now I wasn't so sure. At the repast, I stood near the food table, hands shaking just enough to spill the sweet tea if I weren't careful. Fried chicken, mac and cheese, green beans lined up on foil trays, but I couldn't eat. Couldn't even swallow. Lily? I turned. A tall man in a gray suit stood there. Mr. Langston, Daddy's banker. He leaned in. Spoke low. You don't have to explain anything to them, he said. You own the account. I blinked. Excuse me? Jeremiah made you the sole beneficiary months ago. He trusted you. It's all in order. He walked off before I could say a word. I didn't care about the money. That's not what shook me. What got me was the realization, Daddy knew something was coming. He left it all to me, not out of favoritism, but preparation. My hands weren't trembling from fear anymore. They were trembling from the weight of what I now knew. I wasn't the mistake Monette said I was. I was the plan. Across the room, Monette locked eyes with me again. This time, she wasn't smug. She was mad. The kind of mad that doesn't come from grief, it comes from losing something you thought was yours. And that was the moment I knew this war wasn't over, it was just beginning. The drive home was quiet. So quiet that the hum of the tires and the rhythm of the crickets outside felt louder than anything else. No radio, no conversation, just me in that old sedan, hands tight on the wheel, eyes locked on the road but mind somewhere else. It wasn't just the funeral weighing on me. It was the truth, or whatever twisted thing Monette had tried to drop in front of everyone like a showpiece. And that whisper from Mr. Langston? It kept ringing like a chime in a storm. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light flickered like it always did, cheap wiring I never got around to fixing. I stepped inside and the air hit me. Lavender. Althea's scent still lived in these walls. Her picture sat right where it always had, beside that old rocking chair she loved so much. I didn't touch it. Just nodded toward it, like she might nod back. The turquoise cup, same one I used every evening, was still on the kitchen counter. I picked it up. My hand trembled. Not from age. Not from grief. But from something new. Suspicion. Anger wrapped in quiet. I sat with it. That moment Monette spat those words about Lillie, like they were gospel. Not for the insult, they didn't hurt me. But the venom behind them. The theater of it. She wanted to wound. And she wasn't alone in it. I set the cup down harder than I meant to. The clink echoed. That house, for all its silence, suddenly didn't feel peaceful anymore. That whisper from Langston circled back, "You own the account." It was like someone had handed me a map but didn't tell me where I was starting from. I stared at my phone, thumb hovering over his number. I could have called him right then. But I didn't. Desperation is loud. I've lived long enough to know that. Instead, I told myself to wait. Just sleep on it. That night, I dreamed of Althea. She was sitting in the rocker, wrapped in her Sunday shawl. She didn't say much, never did in dreams. But her voice came clear. They only see what you let them see. When I woke up, sweat stuck to my neck. I reached for the turquoise cup again, then set it next to my phone. That dream wasn't just a dream. It was a reminder. And I whispered to no one but the dark, "Tomorrow, I'll find out." Morning came slower than usual. I hadn't even gotten my coffee when the knock hit the door. Not a neighborly knock. Sharp. Quick. Urgent. I opened it to find Monette standing there, dressed like she was heading to church. And around her neck, our mother's gold chain. She smiled that kind of smile you can't trust. "I thought I'd check in," she said. "You alright?" "I'm breathing." She pushed past me like she owned the place. Walked in and made herself at home on my couch. "I figured we should talk about the estate," she said, crossing her legs slow, like she had all the time in the world. "I'm sure things got a little confusing yesterday." "Did they?" "Lillie, she's always been a bit delicate. Don't let her get in your head. You know Daddy never intended all this to fall on her." I watched her. Not just her words, but how she clutched that necklace like it gave her power. "You know," she added, "it's better if you just let this go. We don't need folks digging into things that don't concern them. Might end up embarrassing yourself." I smiled. "Just barely." "Funny thing," I said, standing tall. "It's not Daddy's money you should be worried about." Her smile broke. Just a crack. But I saw it. "I didn't come here to argue," she said quickly, grabbing her purse. "No. You came to test the water." She didn't respond. Just stood, turned, and walked out. The slam of the door was louder than it needed to be. I stood still for a moment. Then grabbed my keys. By noon, I was sitting across from Mr. Langston in his office. The air conditioning was too cold. The glass desk too clean. He greeted me with the kind of smile bankers give to folks who just walked into something bigger than they expected. "I've been expecting you, Mr. Tucker." He verified my ID, then pulled a thick envelope from a locked drawer. Stamped red, "Confidential, to be released upon my passing." Inside was a single sheet. My father's handwriting. Neat. No flourishes. Just the truth. "I transferred the account to you because you were the only one who earned it. Quietly. Faithfully. Without asking." I read it twice. Then again. It wasn't just about the money. It was validation. I didn't need it, but it landed anyway. And it landed hard. Langston leaned in. You understand what this means, Mr. Tucker. People will come for you now. Be ready. I nodded, folding the letter slow, precise. I was born ready. Just wasn't born noisy. Back in my truck, the city looked the same. But I didn't. I sat there, engine off, fingers tapping the wheel. Thinking about my father. The silence he wore like armor. How folks thought that meant he had nothing to say. Truth is, silence speaks volumes when it has to. He used to tell me, real strength don't shout. It shows up. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. They think silence means surrender, I said quietly. Let him think that. My phone buzzed. One message. Family meeting tomorrow. Estate finalization. I stared at it. Didn't blink. I didn't plan to attend until I realized they planned it without me. I walked into Althea's study like stepping into a quiet echo of her life. The desk still held her pens, the paper sheet rarely clear. I traced my fingers over a photograph, her and me when I was small, smiling, unburdened. I remember her voice then, one day they'll see what you gave me. That line was a promise. Standing here now, I let that promise throb, burn quietly in my chest. They've always seen me as nothing. But not anymore. The turquoise cup, my echo anchor, it waited there as if she knew I'd come back. It whispered patience. I nodded to it, and turned to her locked cabinet. I held the spare key she gave me years ago, hidden under her jewelry case. It felt heavier now. Opening the door, I found stacks of old bank statements, a faded will, and a deed certificate with my name scratched out. My name, someone had tried to erase it. I pulled out my phone and photographed each document, heart pounding like a war drum. This wasn't chance. It was plotted. Then Zariah stormed in. She caught my muttering, that tremble in my voice. Her eyes flashed flame. You're digging into ghosts while everyone in this house treats you like nothing, she spat. I held the phone between us. They aren't ghosts, they're proof. Her anger cracked, tears wavered. She said, I wanted to believe. But they made it easier to doubt you than trust you. The air thickened. It could have turned ugly, but we stopped. Words hung unsaid. Her hand shook as she pulled a paper from my pile. On it was Althea's handwriting, dated just months before she died. If anything happens to me, don't be silent. They will try to erase you. Tears blurred the edges. The foresight in those words struck me like a blow. Zariah collapsed to her knees. I dropped beside her, held her. I will not be silent anymore, I whispered. We sat there, in that hush, listening. The stillness cracked when Monette's car pulled up outside. The front door slammed. Monette burst in, face contorted. You think documents make you king now? She yelled. She lunged, and a vase toppled, shards scattering. I didn't flinch. Instead I met her cold gaze. She recoiled. You want war? Fine. But my weapon is truth, not venom. She left in a huff, the door slamming behind her. I stood there, breathing heavy, tears in my eyes. Not shame. No. A sorrow deeper, love betrayed, trust shattered. But my resolve held firm. I locked the door, returned to the desk, held the letter again. Althea's presence surrounded me. I whispered to empty air, they will know me. They will stop pretending. My resolve stiffened into purpose. I dialed Marseille's number, not for facts, not for proof, but to say, meet me tomorrow morning. I hung up and exhaled slow. Silence answered. Then my phone buzzed, family meeting, 10 a.m. You're expected. They think silence again? They will hear me anyway. I paced in the living room waiting for the gathering, my heart thudding. Word had spread that Monette ordered a meeting in the dining room to finalize the estate. Zariah's text blinked on my phone, everyone's supposed to be there. I thought, they expect me to stay quiet again? Not today. I poured tea into the turquoise cup, my anchor, my echo, and felt the warmth steadier than my thoughts. Daddy's old advice echoed, let your silence anger them, let your truth free you. Before I could finish breathing it in, the doorbell rang. Rhett and Monette entered with stiff faces, no smiles left between us. We sat around the table, uncles, aunts, a few neighbors, Sable in a corner eyeing me. Monette began with practiced softness, words of unity, love lost, and duty. Then she shifted. Dad wanted harmony. But you, Lillie, you stirred mess where there was peace. Her tone snapped like a brittle branch. I kept my voice low. I simply spoke what everyone hid in shadows. Sable sneered. Rhett glanced at his phone. The room held its breath. Then Sable stood, brandishing a reproduction of a family portrait, only mine had been erased. Be real, you never belonged there. Murmurs fluttered through the room. I rose slowly. This room shows your lies, not my absence. I slid the real portrait forward, my face unaltered in its frame. The shift was electric. All at once I wasn't hidden. Sable's lips pressed tight, stunned. Rhett slammed a document onto the table, deed papers demanding I sign over my home. Dad intended this, he barked. I shook my head. You forged his name without knowing his heart, or mine. The tension tightened. I stalked over, pulled out the deed from the stack. It bore my name. This is real. You've been living off lies. My calm voice cut deeper than any yell. A hush crashed over them. Monette's face drained. Rhett's fists clenched. I sat down with gentle authority. They can drown in their guilt. Soraya pressed my hand beneath the table. I glanced at the clock, the turquoise cup, the faces staring. I leaned forward. Let's not pretend this meeting is about peace anymore. Then Soraya slid me her phone, screenshot, the account, changed. Lillie. Me. We owned it. Shock rippled across the table, and I clenched tight to that moment. Their world shifted, and I held the key to a reckoning. The house was silent when I walked back in. Every wall, every shadow, seemed to hold weight. The turquoise cup still sat on the table, tea gone cold, its quiet presence like a pause in a conversation that can't be finished. I stood there, replaying every look I saw at the meeting, Monette's cold contempt, Rhett's smug certainty, Sable's sharp silence. They didn't only covet my father's money. They tried to erase what I meant to him. That thought pressed on me. I moved from room to room, each floorboard creak reminding me I had to carry this burden alone. I couldn't wage war inside these walls. I needed space, clarity, a plan. I drove out to the old church, dusk pressing in around me. Its wooden doors creaked when I entered. Dust motes floated in the fading light. In that sacred quiet, memories rose, my father shaping pews, humming low. The smell of sawdust and faith steadied me. I knelt before no one, prayed to nothing, sought calm. The words I'd grown with echoed in my soul. Strength ain't always about shouting. Sometimes it's waiting till truth echoes. Then I heard footsteps. Mr. Langston appeared in the doorway. He carried an envelope, sealed, delicate. He placed it gently beside me. Your father asked me to deliver this when you had to walk through fire. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. Inside, his handwriting. Ordered, strong. They'll fight over my name, but you'll protect its meaning. You earn more than they ever bothered to take. Langston's voice cut in softly. He said you never needed applause. Just integrity. Heat filled me, not vengeance, but clarity. I held the letter to my chest. My phone buzzed. Soraya. She said she'd found something in storage, an audio file. She sounded small. Vulnerable. What kind of file? I asked. Mom and Monette. Talking about rewriting inheritance. You can hear her pressure, Dad's name, everything. Anger swelled. It wasn't betrayal. It was long betrayal. Langston warned, don't expose them prematurely. Timing is your weapon now. I nodded. This wasn't about grief anymore, it was design. Later, on my porch under a sky thick with stars, I organized every document, every image, every file. No hiding. Just clarity. I labeled, backed up, positioned. They expected confusion from me. I would deliver precision. I poured fresh tea into the turquoise cup. Steam rose slow. Let them dig their own hole, I whispered. I'll build my bridge. Then I dialed Soraya. She answered fast, soft. Let them think they've won, I said. Tomorrow, we start phase 1. I woke before dawn. Before the birds sang. The house was silent, too silent. The turquoise cup sat where I'd left it, the steam long faded. It felt like a mocking remnant of calm before a storm. I set it aside and gathered the documents, the will, Althea's letters, tax statements, the audio file. Every piece a shard of truth. My mind ran a loop. They tried to bury me. I've been digging me out. A text from Soraya appeared, They're already talking. I dressed carefully, no haste, no emotion, only intention. I drove to Caldwell's office downtown, streets empty in the early morning light. The law office's sign over the door felt small but solid. Caldwell rose when I entered. He kept his voice low. I laid out everything. He examined each item, the sealed letter, deeds, writing proofs. We talked strategy, public statement, private resolution. He warned of backlash, countersuits, anger, reputation damage. I nodded. Let them come, I said. I've been ready. Caldwell leaned forward and handed me a small recorder. Listen. Althea's voice filled the room. You can't rewrite what I built, Monette. Then Monette's younger tone, rewrite? It's called justice. My heart stung. This was ammunition. Caldwell confirmed it was admissible under state law, her words, their plan. Pain and vindication collided. I closed my eyes. Not yet, I said. We wait for impact. I left the office with resolve. Home felt different, heavier. I entered to find Monette on the porch, bragging to a cousin about designer handbags and trips, saying it was all from Daddy's legacy. I paused in the doorway. She snapped, back? Save your breath. I stepped forward slowly, pulled out the audio file and original deed. You spent what was never yours, I said. Now you'll answer for it. She lunged, disgust in her voice. You think you're better? You think I'll just let you? I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I stood firm. I won't ask. I'll show. Then I turned and walked past her. Her stunned silence was the loudest sound. In my study, I locked the door and sat behind my desk. I opened my laptop and began writing. Not threats. Just a calm letter to every family member, facts, clarity, no drama. I glanced at Althea's photo, traced the edges. This is for you, I whispered. I copied every file to flash drives, labeled, sealed. The storm was forming, but now it was under my control. The phone rang. Caldwell's voice, crisp. They must see this by noon. Or I leak to the press. I breathed in. Do it. He paused. You ready? I looked around the study, papers, photo, turquoise cup. Yes, I said. They thought silence was my weakness. They're about to hear my voice. The morning air felt tight, as though the house itself knew today would not be quiet. I sat at my desk, documents laid out before me, tracing lines and signatures, rehearsing every word. Even the birds outside were silent. My phone buzzed. Soraya's name on the screen, they're assembling. It's now or never. I let it hang there, then whispered, they think I'm weak. They think I'm finished. They know nothing. The turquoise cup caught the light, still and calm. I rose, stepped outside, inhaled deep. The sun was low, the air cool. This was the calm before the final push. The meeting hall was buzzing by the time I walked in. Family, neighbors, some waving, others staring. Murmurs trailed behind me. Monette stood near the front, face composed. She offered a tight smile. Glad you made it. I nodded, keeping my expression even. My eyes scanned the room. Then I saw him, Lucy in veil, leaning quietly against the back wall, his gaze steady. What was he doing here? Monette began, voice clear. We're here to finalize all matters. Rhett stepped forward with papers in hand. He announced the sale of a property, the division of funds. I stood before he finished. That deed is forged. The room paused. I pulled the original deed from my folder and held it up. This one bears my father's hand, witness signatures, undisturbed chain of custody. Whispers erupted. Rhett's face flushed, Monette's jaw clenched. Lucien watched, still. The power in the room shifted. Suddenly Lucien pushed through the crowd. I deserve to speak, he said. Monette snapped at him, but he held firm. He opened a folder and laid out documents. Sable is not his biological daughter. A gasp tore through the hall. Sable froze. Monette's hand flew to her mouth. Rhett's eyes widened. Lucien revealed maternity records, birth certificates, test results, all signed and verified. The room stilled. I held my breath and let silence settle. Monette's face burned with rage. Rhett stared like he'd seen a ghost. Then the room erupted. Shouts, accusations, chairs scraped. I stood and raised my voice. You have lived off lies. Today, I demand acknowledgement. Some neighbors stirred, others sat in shock. Soraya's voice rose, trembling but firm. "Dad, you deserve better than their silence." Monette lunged at me, but Rhett grabbed her arm. I took a step forward. "I wasn't here to fight, I was here to reclaim my place." Lucien quieted the chaos. He pulled out a sealed envelope, old and worn. He held it high. "This is the final will," he said. "Your father's handwriting. Witnesses. Sable is excluded entirely." The room went dead silent. Monette screamed. Sable collapsed in shock. Rhett stared blankly. I stood unmoving. The tide had turned. I stepped into the hall, documents held tight in my hand. The hush that followed felt heavier than thunder. Whispers died. Stares pinned me. Lucien stood to one side, watching, silent like a sentinel. My heart thudded. This is the moment shadows become light. I nodded to Caldwell, who returned a barely perceptible signal. The eyes of everyone were on me now, and the weight of truth hovered in that quiet. Caldwell advanced and passed a folder to Marseille. His voice rose, steady, full of purpose. "This account is now, and always was, jointly owned by Orlo and Soraya." A collective gasp ricocheted across the room. Monette's eyes went wide. Rhett's lips parted. A screen behind Caldwell flickered to life, displaying months and years of bank ledgers and transactions. They saw it, deposits, withdrawals, signatures, names. I stood tall. "They hid your money from me," I said, pure calm. But truth never sleeps. In that moment, power shifted. The silence that followed was not defeat, it was recognition. Caldwell reached into his case and drew out a sealed will, then broke the seal. He held it high. He read, clear and deliberate, "All assets and estate to Orla Vale and Soraya Vale. Monette Vale and Sable Vale are excluded entirely." The room convulsed. Sable opened her mouth in protest, but the document's authority silenced every objection. It was court-approved, sealed, witnessed. Red looked away, unable to hold his gaze. I cleared my throat and read one passage again. "She who knew the truth could not bury it forever." Soraya's tears began softly. Around us, people murmured in shock and relief. The weight of legacy both lifted and settled on me. Monette's face went slack. She pointed, stumbled over words she couldn't form. Lucien stepped toward her. "I told you the truth. Time to live with it." He spoke quietly but clearly. Sable crumpled in her seat, sobs ripping from her chest. Rage and betrayal roared in her eyes. Rhett's fists clenched tight. He remained silent, staring at the floor. I did not gloat. I did not triumph. I said, "I'm not here to punish. I'm here to be seen." The room stayed heavy. Silence lingered like smoke. As people filed out, some avoiding eye contact, others trembling with realization, Soraya came to me. She wrapped her arms tight around me. "You always were enough," she whispered. Lucien nodded to me from the doorway and walked away, no fanfare, just a shadow. I stepped outside, inhaled the air, looked at sky. I clenched the will in my hand. Betrayal would not define me. In my coat pocket, I pressed fingertips to the turquoise cup, a symbol of the journey from silence to voice. I turned toward home, steps steady, heart braced for rebuilding. Just as I crossed the threshold, I heard, soft but clear, Monette's voice behind me, "This isn't over." I walked on. I sat on that old porch, the one where so much had been lost, and found again. The wood beneath me creaked like it remembered the weight of every argument, every silence. A warm mug of coffee rested in my hand, steam curling into the soft morning air. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but light was starting to spill through the trees. "The fight is over," I thought, "but the echoes still dance." I remembered something Orla once said to me, just after a long day's work in the garden. He looked out past the hedges and said, "Peace don't come from silence. It comes when you stop pretending the pain wasn't real." Lillie walked out without a word and sat beside me. No storm in her anymore, just calm. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. She handed me a biscuit, I nodded, and we watched the morning stretch out like we had all the time in the world. That porch wasn't a hiding place anymore. It had become a space to breathe again. Later that afternoon, Soraya called me over. Said she wanted to show me something. Her voice held something different now, something soft but rooted. I followed her into the back garden of her place. It was wild. Overgrown. Weeds coiling up between bricks, sunflowers drooping, figs long unharvested. But it wasn't dead. It was waiting. She pointed to a tree stump, rubbed her hand over the cracked bark. He planted truth even when we ignored it. We didn't talk much more. We just got to work. Pruning, digging, clearing out the things that had no business still being there. Every snip felt like pulling away the lies. Every seed dropped into the soil felt like a second chance. People began to show up. Not out of pity, but respect. Neighbors who had turned away now offered cuttings from their own gardens, helped replant. One brought sweet potatoes. Another offered seedlings. I wasn't just the one they whispered about anymore. I was becoming someone they looked in the eye. A few days later, Lucien knocked on my door. No ceremony. No drama. He just handed me a small envelope, sealed in wax, no return address. I opened it once he'd gone. Inside was a photograph, me as a baby, held tight in Orlo's arms. The second item was a letter. Althea's handwriting, no mistaking it. She wrote, "I let my shame speak louder than your truth. I knew. I always knew. I loved you, but I didn't know how to face what that meant. Forgive me, if you can." Tears came, but they didn't hurt. They released something I didn't realize was still holding on. Lillie walked in, saw the letter in my lap. She didn't say anything, just took my hand and sat with me. Her presence didn't need explaining anymore. She stayed. That was her way of saying sorry. I made a decision that evening. I wasn't going to sell the house. I started clearing out the garage. Turned it into a little space with chairs and chalkboards. Hung up old photos, books, and planted tools on the walls. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Kids began coming around. I taught them how to balance a checkbook, how to grow tomatoes, how to hold their heads high when folks tried to shrink them. I invited some elders to come by too. Miss Eloise told stories from the migration. Big Tommy taught boys how to fix engines. What we built wasn't a program. It was a legacy, living, breathing, growing. One morning, I wrote in my journal, "Legacy ain't what you leave. It's who you lift." On the last Sunday of the month, Zariah, Lillie, and I went to the cemetery. The sun was high. A breeze kept the heat from sticking. We poured libation, prayed, and shared truths. Zariah said, "I judged you because I didn't understand you. I do now." Lillie whispered, "I was scared of the part of me that saw you." I stood there and looked at Orlo's name etched in stone. "You gave me strength I didn't know I had," I said. "I see it now." Zariah pulled the turquoise cup from her bag and placed it gently at the base of the headstone. That little cup, so small, but it carried everything. As we walked away, the wind felt light. There were no more ghosts. Just echoes. And they didn't haunt, they hummed like old hymns. Later that week, I was locking Orlo's gate behind me when a little girl from down the street tugged at my sleeve. "Will you teach me how to grow these?" she asked, pointing at the green shoots just poking up. I looked at her, then at the soil. "Yes, baby," I said, kneeling down beside her. "I surely will."